So for example, social studies. When it comes to social studies, sometimes students have a background knowledge of maybe US history or certain types of events that took place in history. And so what happens is we take what we already know or what we think we know about a particular event or situation. And so when they read a question, even though there may be a passage with certain information there, some students will skim the passage or not use it. And then they'll take what they think they know and they'll get the answer wrong. And they say, but this is what I was taught. And the question is, well, what does the passage support for your answer? So that's why we have to be careful when we're reading to use what we have to provide that evidence so that we can support our choice and we can make that educated guess. You're going to hear me say that a lot, making an inference, which is simply making an educated guess, using what you have to support your choice in making the best decision possible. And so today we're going to take a look at a strategy called SQ4R, and that's going to help us to practice some different skills. We talked about the day before, we talked about 5 tips to help us improve our reading comprehension. This particular strategy here is going to incorporate some of those same tips that I gave you on that second day of class, okay? So now what we're going to do, we started on a base level, now we're getting ready to build on top of that. We call it scaffolding. We're going to build on top of that, add something else to the layer, and then I'm going to have you incorporate it in your reading. And remember, that is what we're here for, reading in the content areas. We use these strategies to help us better understand what we're reading and come to sound decisions in our answers by using the skills that we need to help us comprehend our text better and read with fluency. So as I share my screen here, I'm going to share this. So SQ4R, and that stands for, at the bottom I have what it all stands for, okay? It stands for survey, question, read, recite, review, and reflect. These are all things that we should be doing while we're reading. Yesterday I posed a question on the day before, have you ever read anything? And I had you raise your hand and say, have you ever read anything and you realize you keep reading the same sentence over and over again, or you'll read the whole page and then you'll go to your first question and you'll realize, I don't even remember what this text is about. It happens. It happens to us more often than not. And so this particular method, and I say method because this is a full method, will assist us in that. Okay. In our intro here, we are going to review what the reading strategy SQ4R is. What is it? We're going to talk about why it's important to teach this to my classes. Why do I teach this? Why is this important for us to use? And then how can you as a student use it and practice it to become a better reader or learner, period, because this assists you in any type of learning that you have. The SQ4R method, this SQ, and I'm just going to say SQ, this SQ method has actually been used and proven to be proficient. It's been used ever since the 60s. And I am a firm believer when it comes to education and learning that we have to readapt our methods and things over time, because I do believe as generations change, as students change, as our resources change, social norms change, that methods should change as well. I don't like, I love tradition, but I don't like becoming stagnant to feel like just because it's traditional, we have to do it, because that doesn't work for everyone. But this method has worked since the 60s, and it's been proven to work generation after generation after generation. And I think that's why you'll hear people call it a classic reading method in their reading. So you got your, I'm sorry, I'm trying to read your message. Something popped up on my screen, sorry. And it won't disappear. There we go. Okay. Yes, and that is a big struggle, Rachel. It is a big struggle with us often trying to understand and finding a passage interesting and just trying to understand some things with our passages. And being involved in what we're reading and what we're doing is going to help us with that a lot. It will definitely help us. Okay. So, like I said, it's the classic method. And so this method has been proven to work. And that's why we use this method. We don't use this method just so I can say, oh, I gave you another method to use in class, I'm using it. We use this method because it works if you use it, but you have to use it. The process, it only takes you a few minutes, but the process does take practice. It is not something that you can do once or twice and say, I got it. Because what happens, you hear me talk about metacognition often. When we're thinking about what we're doing while we're doing it, oftentimes what happens is if we only use something once or twice, it doesn't become a habit for us. They say it takes 30 days to create a habit, right? And so in thinking about that, it's the same thing when it comes to your reading. If you don't read every day, you're not going to get any better at it because you're using those memory muscles to help you with those same skills. If you're not working on your vocabulary, or say you're not, say, cooking every day. I used to consider myself to be a really good cook. I love to cook. I deployed on my last deployment. I was gone for almost a year and I didn't cook. I was in the field. I didn't cook. I was worried about other things. And so I came home and tried to make the simplest things and oh, it was a disaster. And I was so hurt. And of course my family smiled and they ate it like it was good. And I'm sitting there looking like, why are y'all even eating this nasty? And so, but I realized that it was a skill that I hadn't used for so long. And so I had to get myself back into adapting to taste and different things like that. And it's the same thing with your learning. And so in this method, the first thing that we are going to take a look at is the S, okay? We're going to take a look at S. Anybody, and so the S stood for survey, right? My brain is like, whoop. The S, the S stood for survey. And so when we survey, what I want you to do while we're doing this actually is I want you to pull out that template if you can. If you can pull up that template that we took a look at, I want you to pull up that template. I'm actually getting ready to pull it up and put it on the screen to share with you, but I want to go to kind of talk through it for a minute. So if you can look at it while I'm talking about it from email, that will be good. If not, I'm going to put it up in a second, so don't even worry about it, okay? So the S is for survey. The Q stands for questions, asking questions. The R stands for reading it. You have to read it. The second R stands for responding to it. And that's usually in your own words. And we're going to break down and unpack what it looks like responding to it in your own words. And then the third R stands for record. To record, to kind of summarize it. I have you do verbal recording for Flipgrid, and there's a reason that I do that, because I want you to get used to reflecting about different things that you do, exercises, and even different things that you read. There's a concept, a writing concept, and the concept in writing is that we as educators ask students to reflect on their own writing, and many of them have never been asked to do that. And so if you've never been asked to do something, how do I expect you to be able to do it and do it proficiently and effectively? And so that's one reason we do the Flipgrid, is because it gets you used to reflecting on different lessons, different activities, different reading, because many of us don't do that. And one part of learning is a reflection piece. If you don't go back and review what you learned, 9 times out of 10, you're going to do a brain dump. You're going to hear me like now, you might be doing something else. You're like, oh, she's just talking and talking and talking. And so you start to zone out and you do a brain dump. But when you reflect on things, what happens is, or you respond to them, what happens is over time, even if you didn't receive everything that was given to you, there are pieces of that that you did. And so when you reflect on it or respond to it, you're summarizing those and you're getting out those pieces that you did retain. So later on, when you hear or review a message, or a passage, what happens there? Now you have a chance to know what parts of that message you didn't receive. And so that's what you focus on the next time around, if that makes sense. Go ahead, Rachel.
I have a question about the Flipgrid app. I just want to make
Mm-hmm.
sure I'm using it properly. After recording the video, I don't have to press share, right? It just sends to you. Have you been receiving mine? Is my question.
Yes,
I'm
I
not.
have been receiving yours. I actually got two more yesterday that I didn't take a look at yet.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So actually I can look and see if it was. Yep. So
Okay,
I've been
great.
receiving them, so you're good to go.
Thanks.
And those are important. So if you haven't gotten in there and responded to the Flipgrid, please do that. It is for your benefit. It is simple. I think today's for when you do it later on today. Yes, you have a Flipgrid to do today. When you do it later on, I think I gave you 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes, just because I know some of you were saying, oh, it kept running out on time and I started over because I felt like I was doing something wrong. So I gave you a little extra time, but you don't have to take long to just kind of reflect on what it is and respond to it. And that's why we do that. And I know you're like, why do you have to explain it to me? You just give it to me. I explained what we do and why we do it because I want you to have a buy-in on that activity. I want you to say, okay, this is why I'm doing it and this is what I plan to gain from it. That's our objectives, right? So I'm going to stop sharing this slide for you real quick and I'm going to pull up that template that we were talking about and go ahead and share our template. Okay, hopefully you can see that fairly decent. I know if you're on a phone or something, it may be kind of small. We're going to talk through this form and then we're actually going to practice and model it together first. And then I'm going to have you go and finish preparing it on your own. Okay. So at the first thing we want to do, and we talked about it with our 5 tips, is use everything they gave us. And when we talked about that, we talked about using the title, using the pictures, the subtitles, the summaries, the vocabulary, whatever it is extra they give us. If you see words in bold, if you see words in italics, use all of that to kind of give yourself a general knowledge or a general idea of what you think is getting ready to occur or what the passage may be about. And one of the biggest pieces of that is title of the reading. Read the title. Um, look at the title of it and see what it's referring to. That is the number one kicker. There are students who literally just start reading and you say, well, what is it about? And they don't know. And then they read the title and they were like, oh, I thought it was about this. If they would have read the title, they would have known sometimes what the focus is. Because remember, I told you sometimes titles can be deceiving. But the first thing is to read the title, survey. And in surveying, it says, look over the beginning sentences of each paragraph. I think some students had an issue with the central or the main idea, identifying central and main ideas. And we're going to talk about and practice at that. And one rule of thumb is that normally writers will put the main idea in the first sentence of each paragraph. So whatever that paragraph is going to be about, you're usually going to find it either in the first sentence of the paragraph or in the last sentence. So if you read the first sentence and you don't see it and you're like, okay, I'm not sure, read the last sentence. So when you're surveying, you're going to look over getting sentences of each paragraph, trying to see if you can determine what your main idea or your central themes. Maybe your central theme and your main idea could be a little different because your central theme is kind of the overall theme. So maybe the overall theme is building pyramids, right? Your central theme. But maybe your idea for each passage is the type of pyramids that were built in certain times or the way they built them in certain times. And so focusing and looking what my central or overall theme may be versus what my main idea for each paragraph can be a little different. And that's why we survey, okay? We talked about look at the illustrations and the captions. We miss good information just from not paying attention to the fact that maybe a word is bold, maybe something is italicized. That tells us something. I know it's simple, but that tells us something and something important. Maybe something's italicized because it's the title of something that's supporting their point, right? So that's why we want to pay attention to stuff like that. And then read the summary or last paragraph. When you're on your test, at times you don't have access to the last paragraph sometimes. Sometimes you have to click to another screen. And then if you click back, it can kind of be jinky for you. So my advice is always to read whatever the last paragraph is you see in front of you at the time. Okay, if you're using that method in surveying. Surveying should not take you like more than like 2 to 3 minutes. It is literally how you skim. Okay, we're skimming through. We're just kind of looking at keys because remember, we're going to read this. You're going to read your text, and you're going to take the time to figure it out. But you want to skim over and catch key points and things that stick out to you. That's the kind of goal. It's like looking at your kid getting ready to go to school in the morning. If you have kids and you're kind of skimming them up, trying to make sure, okay, look, what's sticking out to me? Why is your ponytail sticking to the left right there? And I just did it, right? So it's just those minor, simple things that will stick out to you. And then that kind of gets your brain either doing the next thing, which is questions. You want to make sure that you're asking questions before you even start, or you figure out what questions you can answer. And that's part of that reflection. I just surveyed it. I just skimmed it. Okay, let me see and respond or reflect on what I noticed. And then you want to see if you can answer. It says turn the title into a question. So say we're reading a passage titled The Lottery. Okay, maybe I can turn that question, that title into a question saying, what is the lottery? Who can win the lottery? How do I take place in the lottery? Okay, that's a way you can turn that title into a question. And in turning that title into a question, now it begins your brain to thinking about different stuff of that nature. Go ahead, Sarah.
So I noticed with the assessment, there was like little facts on the bottom that like show things that happened in the story at the very end. Is that like a kind of what would be like on the test too?
Yes. On the test, they call it footnotes. And so you may see that on your passages on the test. Those footnotes are very important. I know on the as instructors, we're not allowed to see your official test. We've never gotten to see one. It sucks because I would love to see what it looks like. So what we do is get feedback from students. But what I do know is on the qualifying test, you have footnotes. And they are very important. Give you, students have missed questions because they didn't read the footnotes and the answer was kind of right there. Okay. Go ahead, Rachel.
Should we be reading footnotes first during our initial survey/skim?
I recommend looking at your footnotes in the survey. Yes. It can help you when you see it later on in the passage. If you forget to, oftentimes when you see a certain word, if you have footnotes, say there's definitions in your footnotes. If you forget to read your footnotes, what you'll notice when you get to a particular word, there may be a little number next to it at the top, kind of like an exponent. With math, it'll be a 1 or 2 or something. That's a key for you that there's information for you somewhere else. So that's when you need to look down or over, wherever it may be, to gain that information. Okay. Those are really good questions, actually, really 2 really good questions. Any other questions? Okay, so as we're questioning, once we turn our title into a question, then we want to take a look at seeing what questions we may can answer. And we always hear about the 5 W's, right? 5 W's and the H. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Those are questions that we want to try to see if we can answer just from skimming. Who is this? Who is it? What is it about? Where did this happen? When did this happen? Why did this happen? Or how did this happen? That's a very big key for us, because that way, if we can answer 2 out of 6 of those, then we already know certain information, right? So when we go to read, now we're focusing on finding the answer for those questions that we couldn't answer in our heads. Same thing with illustrations or graphics. When you're taking a look at your social studies or science, it's the same. It is the same skill. The who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. And being able to answer those. I always tell students, if you can answer those questions at the end of a passage after reading it, you can get at least usually about 75% of those questions right off the bat if you're taking the time to really answer those questions. I'm not talking about where somewhere in Europe, like focusing in and getting as detailed as you can with those answers. It tends to be very useful for students when they do that. Okay. In your questions, once you've determined what questions you can answer just from surveying, right? We haven't read the passage yet. We took a quick 2 minutes. We surveyed what caught my attention. What can I answer real quick off my head based on what I saw with graphics, based on what I saw reading the first sentence, or looking at the captions, looking in the footnotes. Then you want to focus on writing down unfamiliar words. That's a vocabulary thing again. What did I see? Are there any words I saw that I don't know, or I'm not sure, I'm confused about, that I want to find out more about in here? Are there any questions that I have? Write that down so that when you're reading, you have something to refer back to, so you can say, oh, because what happens when we don't write things down, and you'll see me every day, you're going to see me with this, and it's not neat, but I scribble down, and I do it because I have so much going on. I think I can just multitask for days, which I'm kind of good at, but sometimes I'm not. And what it does is it helps you to have something to focus back and refer back to. And so if I had a question and I'm reading a 2-page passage, I'm probably going to forget what I was thinking when I started. So if I write down those unfamiliar words, or if I write down those questions that I have, I'm not sure what this means. What are they talking about? I noticed this. What are they talking about with that? When I'm reading my passage, if I kind of glance back over and look at those at different points, when I see different words that pop back out at me, then I'm able to remember what my question was, as well as being able to say, oh, well, I think I found the answer here. And maybe jot down you can jot down a paragraph you found it in, or a word that you found that will give you that kind of that make that light bulb come on. There we go. I'm trying to find my words here. My coffee cup is still full, y'all. That word. So that's what we want to do when we're questioning. Okay. So we have surveying, quick 2 minutes, right? Questioning. For your questioning phase, I wouldn't take a long period of time as well. It took you 2 minutes to survey, maybe take 3, not even 4 minutes to do your question part, right? Because we don't have a lot of time. Now, when you start this out, I don't want you to rush. Take your time as we first start to do it. That's what the class time is for. And then over time, what you'll know will happen is you'll do it faster. So for example, as I give you practice text to do this with, we're going to take our time. You're going to walk through it, and you're going to make sure that you're doing as much as you can and really thinking about and processing what you're doing. Maybe in about 2 weeks or so, as I give you different text, I'm probably going to give you text different style. Instead of comma lit, I may give you text the way that it looks on a practice test, right? When you're taking it on your practice test, guess what? You're timed. So I may say, here's a passage with some questions from a practice test, and you have 15 minutes to do this portion, or you have 10 minutes. So then, and the reason we'll do that is to help you take what you've practiced over the last couple of weeks and do it, but now we're going to do it in a condensed time because you practice it and you remember, okay, this is what I do first, this is what I do next. And then you're able to apply that particular skill to a style of the test, so that we can prepare you not just to use the skill on the test, but to use the skill in a timely manner. Any questions on that before I move to the next portion of this? Go ahead, Rachel.
SQ4R, is this something that we'll be using a lot, like in order to prepare for the test in general?
Yes, this is something I'm going to have you do a lot. And I'll usually tell you that I'll be like, okay, I want you to pull out your SQ4R handout. Okay. Pull it up, and I want you to use that when you're reading.
I'm going to print it out because I feel like paper will be more helpful, but I was just wondering if that would be necessary.
Okay, yep. If you're going to print it out, I would print out a few copies for yourself.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. if someone needs some handouts or copies of this, and you don't have access to a printer, let me know. I have a printer. I can print out a few copies and drop some in the mail to you, so you can have a few of them. I can send you about 5 or 6 of them, but I need to know that probably before class, so that that's something I can get done over the weekend if you're going to need it. Okay. All right. So once we've surveyed, once we've asked questions in the question piece, then we want to look at our 4Rs. Now this is where we get to our R4 piece of this. We want to next we want to read it. So I've surveyed it. I've answered the questions that I could answer just from the surveying it, and I've written down questions that I have as far as vocabulary, main ideas, things like that I noticed during my surveying. And now I actually want to read the passage. While you're reading, this is the time that you look for the answers to the questions that you had on the previous page. Okay. If you don't write down questions, nine times out of 10, you're not gonna really focus in on particular answering questions in your brain while you're reading. You're gonna be consumed with what I like to say is reading the words on the page. And just because I read the words on the page doesn't mean that I understand what I'm reading. And that is a habit we want to get out of. I don't just want to read the words on the page. I want to actually understand and comprehend it when I'm reading. Now, keep in mind that sometimes you have to read something more than once. Don't feel that because you need to read it more than once that you're lacking in a skill as a reader. That's not true. Oftentimes, all readers, no matter what skill level you are, need to read more than once. And so, and you're going to see that in one of the other R's, rereading it. On the test, we don't really have time to reread it. I'm going to give you a tip, though, that a lot of students have told me about the reading test. A lot of students say that on the reading test, they'll get a passage, and then they'll get some questions, and then they'll go to the next page, and they'll think it's a brand new passage, and it's the same passage with additional questions for that passage. So that surveying will be handy for you, because if you surveyed it the first time, when you see a new passage and you go to survey it again, you will see, wait a minute, I just read this passage. Okay, I don't have to waste the time to reread it. Or if you need to reread something to answer a particular question on that page, guess what? You kind of know which paragraph to focus in on this time versus rereading the whole thing. And that's how you eliminate some of that time that you take versus, oh, here's another. Because I've had students do that. They were like, I reread the whole passage and got to the end and realized I just read this passage and I wasted like 10 minutes. So surveying it is good, and focus in when you switch to the next passage during your test. If it looks familiar when you survey it, it's probably because it is. So you don't have to waste the time to read it again unless you need to read a particular paragraph. Okay. So after you read it and you're looking to answer the questions that you wrote down before, next thing is you're going to recite it, okay? You're going to put your reading away and think about what you read. How much do you remember? So, and I don't know how many people have you ever, for school before, or church or some type of program you're in, have they ever made you recite different speeches? There's a reason why they do the recite and the repetition. People say, oh, are they making me memorize the speech? I don't care about this, whatever this is. But what that does, that's a part of that reflection. Getting you to reflect on what it is that they gave you. For example, some people have to memorize the preamble to the Constitution. Okay. And to be the people to form a more perfect union, right? What does that mean? When I'm reciting it, sometimes I'm just repeating the words that I memorized from the page. But over time, as I recite it and I learn to make those connections and think about it, I'm really understanding what that means. Okay? Believe that all men are created equal and have the right to life, liberty, and in the pursuit of happiness. Okay, well, what does that mean to me? Go ahead, Sarah.
So is it kind of when I find something that I don't really am not interested in, sometimes I try to put it in my own words, or if I read a word I can't pronounce, I kind of like make up a word for it. Is that kind of like reciting?
Yes, that is a lot like reciting. Yeah. And I like the word choice that you just used there, putting it in your own words. And that is a part of that recite. Summarize it in your own words. We all have a voice. As students, each and every one of you have your own voice, right? Regardless of what it is. And you have a right to that voice. And it's very important that you use it because you know how your brain operates. I can't tell you, me as an educator, it is not my job to tell you what to think. It's my job to help teach you how to think in different ways and how to unfold different information. And so when you summarize it using your own words, that helps you determine what information and how you process it in the level that you understand it. Never let anybody tell you that you're wrong about it unless they can prove evidence like, no, evidence says this is what it is. Sometimes we are wrong. But just because you choose to, see what word choice I want to use here, just because you choose to respond to or to give a synopsis of something in a certain way, that's beneficial for you. Okay. So yes, in your own words. Any questions or anything else before we move on to the next one here? Okay. So after you've recited, summarizing it in your own words, and answered any of the questions that you were able to answer after you read it. Okay, so by the time you read it, you should be able to answer more questions this time, right? But there still may be some questions that you need the answers to. Then you're going to review it. And when you review it, this is where you look at it again, and you're going to find that missing information to finish answering the questions on part two. This is where I say you may not need to reread the entire passage. You may only need to reread a particular paragraph. So if you know the first part talks about the people who built the pyramids, but you have a question on what tools or what they use to do that with, and you kind of remember something like that in paragraph 3, then you know when you review, you want to reread paragraph 3. Because now you're searching for the remaining answers to the questions that you haven't been able to answer so far. And that's pretty much what review is, that focusing in on what information is still missing. Okay. Does that make sense? Anyone have any questions there? Okay. The last R here in our SQ4R is to reflect. And we've kind of been talking about that, right? Think about what you read overall now. What were the surprises to you? This is where close reading things come into play, and we're gonna mess with annotations next week and things for close reading. I'm gonna have you create your own close reading annotations. But what was a surprise to you? When you read the title and you finished reading the passage, were you surprised that something happened just because the title talks about one thing? Remember I told you I always use the lottery, one of my favorite pieces, however grotesque it may be. And I tell you, when I'm reading the title, I always was like, oh, it's going to win the lottery. Oh, this is going to be fun. This is going to be a good story. And at the end, it's about somebody dying. And so that's a surprise. When I reflect, like, oh my goodness, I didn't see that coming. The title was kind of misleading you. And so you want to look at stuff like that. What do you know now that you didn't know before? Think about something you learned in it. I don't care how boring or how uninterested you are in a text, you should always find one thing that you learn, right? You may say, I'm not really interested in fossils, but there is one thing that I learned from reading this, even though it was kind of boring. Pick out that one thing because that made that reading worthwhile, okay? So, and then be prepared. It says be prepared to discuss this within class. I don't have you, we'll discuss some things in class, like I'll put you in breakout groups and have you do that and discuss some stuff in breakout groups. But I won't necessarily have you get on and turn your camera on and force you to do that. That's why we do the flip grid, because that is your personal space to respond to anything. I'll have you respond to different passages we read. I'll probably respond to a poem next week because most people just hate poetry. But that's your safe space. And that's where that part of the reflection comes in when it says be prepared to discuss with class. That's where I want you to be prepared to discuss anything you found or you missed in that flip grid. And that gives you that tool and that safe space to do that in. Okay. Do I have any questions on that before we pull this passage that we're going to use for it? Nope. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, if you have that passage, I want you to go ahead and pull out that passage on the woman who helped Anne Frank. I'm going to stop sharing this screen and then I'm going to pull that passage out, which I think I forgot to upload in here. So let me get that in here. And while we're doing this, what I want you to do is, if you're not able to have your, if you don't have split screens or you're not able to go back and forth between the handout and the passage, what I want you to do is I want you to real quick on your piece of paper, I want you to write down those words, and I'm going to do it with you just to make my turnover time a little slower. I want you to write down the word they, give yourself some space, write down the word questions. And I'm going to put 5 W's in H so I can remember what questions I'm asking. I want you to write down the word read, recite, review, and reflect. That way, if you can't go back and forth, you have it on a piece of paper and you know what your next step is and what we're getting ready to focus on as we look at this together as a group. Okay. So as my file uploads, and then I'm going to share this passage with the group. If you have the passage and you can open it up, feel free to open it up on your device if it makes it easier for you to see it. Yep, go ahead, Rachel.
And then you're adding it to Common Lit for us to answer the questions of the passage, or?
Yeah, when we're done with this, I'm going to add it. Yeah, I'm going to add it to Common Lit.
Right now.
Yeah, we're just reading it right now. We'll answer the question part of it in Common Lit because I can keep your results and see everybody's results together that way. Okay. So here we have your particular passage here, the woman who helped Anne Frank. Okay. So on this page 1, and I know it's a little small for you, that's why I said if you can pull it up on your device, please do so. And I'm actually going to pull it up because my glasses aren't helping me as much as I would like them to. Okay, so the first step we're going to do is survey. Y'all don't laugh at me. Y'all saw my camera just hit my light, just hit me in the head. The first thing that we're going to do is survey what we're reading. Okay, so I'm going to give you just a minute or so to take a look at this particular passage. And I want you to just do the survey piece of it, right? Look at the title, look at the captions, look at the synopsis, anything like that. So our time is going to start now. Okay. So in surveying just this first part here, this first page, if you have it in front of you, maybe you went ahead and looked up and you kind of reviewed more of it. But in just surveying this first page here, was there anything that stuck out to you while you were looking at it? Go ahead, Rachel.
I noticed that it's written in an interview format.
Yeah, that dialogue, right? That's one thing I
Yes.
noticed too. Yep. Go ahead, Sarah.
I noticed that it has like the footnote for defining some of the stuff in it.
Yep. So we saw a footnote. I think I remember seeing the word deport or preserve or something like that in the footnotes, right? Okay. Did anybody get a chance to read the part in the gray there? Okay.
The top part in the gray.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if we're thinking about that piece, one second, Rachel, I got you. If we're thinking about that piece, when we looked at questions, there were some questions we were able to answer just from reading that piece, right? Go ahead, Sarah. What did you have?
You're talking about like the who, what, where, when, and how.
Yep. The
Yeah.
question. So if we move on to the question part, the who, what, when, where, and how, just from what we surveyed on this page, what questions could we answer?
You can answer who, you can
Okay.
you can answer where, and you can answer when. And then I mean, I guess you could kind of answer how. You just don't really see yet how it plays out on how she helps them.
Okay. So that's when you can kind of maybe you can make an assumption or a guess at, which can help you later on when you figure it out and you read, okay, well, how did she actually help them? And maybe that's a question that you pose to say, okay, well, I see who helped, but how does she actually help them, right? So the who, um, what was her name? Can anybody pronounce that?
I don't know. When I don't know a word, I just kind of like make my own. So I was just calling her Meep Geese. I don't know.
Right.
I would
So
say
maybe
gills. Is that right?
does it say what?
Gills?
And so that's kind of the hardest. That's what I said. Does anyone know? Because I don't. Maybe it's Gills. I don't. Depending on German, right? If she was German or if she was something Jewish or something else, I would assume maybe she was German. Um, how do you pronounce that in that? So just saying it the best way you can, or just saying MG, right? So I think I wrote down MG here. Under MG, um, helps in that case. When did this take place? Anybody know when this took place?
The late 40s, early 50s? Or no?
Okay. Maybe late 40s, early 50s. When did this interview take place?
1998.
Okay. So we see the interview took place in 1998. And the event that she's talking about, we're thinking about late 30s, early 40s. Okay. World War II time frame, so to speak. And that may be knowledge you kind of already know, or that may be knowledge that you pick up from this passage, right? Where did this happen?
Amsterdam?
Hmm. And when did this happen? During what? I gave you a part of it, but what is the big event that we know this occurred when?
The Second World War.
What was the big catastrophic event within the Second World War? It's in that gray area up there. It says
The
during
Holocaust.
the Holocaust. That's important to make a note of. We can make that assumption and say, okay, I know that the issues with persecuting of Jews and things by the Germans took place in World War II, but this passage specifically tells us in Amsterdam during the Holocaust. So that's my win. Okay, so if I have a choice between 1938 and Holocaust, I'm going to go with Holocaust because it tells me that here, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, I had a question about, so when I'm skimming, should I be reading that first thing in the gray?
Yep. So remember, I told you that's part of it. That any introductions, I call them preface. The preface or the summary in our 5 tips. That would be considered kind of a summary or preface for your reading. So that's information the author thinks is very important for you to know. Okay. All right. So did you pose any questions for yourself while you were surveying this? And Raina and Divya, I know you're really quiet. If you want to type something in the chat box and respond, please feel free. Share with me what you got there. Go ahead, Sarah. I put the hand down and I'm like, wait a minute.
So when you're doing the why, would that just be like, are you answering why she helped them, or like why it's happening?
So you can, it's up to you. You can do both. What's the title of it?
The woman who helped Anne Frank dies at 100.
Okay. So which of those do you think made me more fitting to the title?
Like why she helped.
Yeah, you could. I would answer if you find the answer to both there. I would take that in, but I would probably bet money that my focus would be on why she helped Anne Frank. Okay. Okay. So now that we've surveyed it, we've answered the questions, the 5 W's and the how, or maybe not. We've tried to answer what we there. We've posed any questions of our own. One of the questions was, why did she help him, or how did she help him? Right? We say, well, maybe we can make an assumption, but we're not sure. So that's a question we can pose for later. And then the next thing that we're going to do now is you're going to actually read this. I don't want you to read the entire thing. I just want you to read the first page of this interview because we did establish this is a dialogue, this is an interview. So go ahead and take a few minutes and just read the first page from the title on down to those prefix to those footnotes in the bottom. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that. I'm talking and I realize my mic is muted. Go ahead, Rachel.
I was telling you I couldn't hear you.
Thank you. So, okay, let's go ahead and take a look and see if we can take just what we read from this first page here and implement this strategy, okay? So, we read through the first portion of dialogue on this particular conversation. Are there any questions that we can answer or that we posed that we can answer now?
She's Dutch.
Yeah, she's Dutch. Remember, we asked her, is she German? Is she Jew? We don't know. We found out that she's Dutch, right? Um, how did we find out she was Dutch?
Because that's the language that she spoke.
Yep. They asked her, I think Susan asked her, how do you say diary in Dutch? And then she told him how to say it in Dutch. So we found that she was Dutch, right? And that comes with that recite, right? I was able to, that's one line that stuck out to me. Is there anything you can recite for that you remember? Anybody find anything interesting in that gray part? Go ahead, Rachel.
It means day book. Diary
Mm-hmm.
is translated in Dutch.
Diary is translated in Dutch as day book. Okay. Go ahead, Sarah.
I found it interesting that I've never like heard of her, and she's the one who actually preserved her diary.
Mm-hmm. She's the one who found her diary, right? And you never heard of her. Um, you know what I found interesting, and that's along those same lines, and it talked about her. I never realized, and maybe it's just been years since I've actually read the book. I probably was in middle school or high school or something. Is I forgot her father her father lived. Her father survived the Holocaust, and he's the one who actually published her book. So that's interesting to know that she's a child and her father's the one who had to preserve her legacy, right? Go ahead, Rachel.
I always thought that Otto Frank, who's her father, found the book. I've been to the Anne Frank house, like the museum, twice actually.
Uh-huh.
And it's something that I'm like have spent a lot of time researching, and I have never heard of her either.
You've never heard of MG?
Yes.
Right, right. I'm like, I don't know how to pronounce that either. And yeah, and that's very interesting. I think to know that, like you say, you go to the Holocaust museums. We've heard about Anne Frank. You've heard mention of that Otto Frank at times, and maybe forget. But we've never heard about the woman who, at the last person to see her alive in a way, or to see her alive in a safe space, possibly. We've never heard of her until this moment. And that's something that's very interesting about history is there's so much history that we just don't know. And so it tickles me oftentimes when people say, oh, whatever, that's not true, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, there's information out that we don't know. And so that is interesting to know, especially since you've been to the different the house and things like that, and they don't have mention of her. It's really interesting. Okay, so we were all able to recite things that we know that stuck out and we remembered here. So as we review, are there any questions that we had that we think now when we go back and reread that we would need to focus on? Okay, and maybe not. And for this example, we're only using a one page, right? It's very small information. So maybe not. Maybe there's some questions that we haven't had a chance to pose yet because we haven't read the whole thing. And so on this next go around, when you get ready to break out and do it on your own, that is going to be something that we're going to take a look at. And then reflect on it. And then after that, we'll reflect on it. And I think in that reciting, we probably did some pretty good reflecting, but there's more reflection that we can do once we finish reading the whole passage. Okay. So what I'm getting ready to do now is I'm going to go over here into Common Lit, and I am going to, let me look at your assignments as a class so that I can actually give you this to start. And the only reason that I don't give you everything and put the date on it for like right then is because I often have students go in, even though I say don't touch it yet, they go in and they start doing it. So I wanted to give you that. I wanted to wait until, and plus I had it scheduled for Tuesday and I needed to fix it. Okay. So I just went in and I changed this passage to today in Common Lit. So you should be able to go in Common Lit now and it should appear in your assignments. If it doesn't, just hit refresh and it should refresh for you. So what I want you to do now, and I'm going to go ahead and go back to our slides here. I'm going to unshare that. I'm going to go back to our slides because we went through a good piece. So give me 1 second here. Okay, so what we just finished doing, it's the I model, you follow piece. And actually we did it together as a class where we as a group, we went through and we just used the first page of this particular article, and we walked through this practice together. So now I'm gonna have you practice it on your own. So you can go into Common Lit, and I'm not gonna do the breakout groups today. I'm gonna use the breakout groups for poetry because that one is that can be more challenging, especially using this particular strategy with poetry. And you'll see why when we do it. But you're going to go ahead and go on and lit. You can pull up the woman who helped Anne Frank dies at 100. And I want you to use this method for the entire passage. We did it for the first page. So now you can go through it on the next few pages. Once you finish going through this method, and you filled out your template or your paper with these things, then I want you to answer the questions that you have, the reflection and discussion questions. I will see them in the system and I can respond to them and grade them and release your score to you once you're done. And then once you're done with that, I'm gonna put the Flipgrid response link. I'm gonna put it in the comments here, and then I'll email it to everyone as well in a few minutes. And so when you're done with reading the entire passage, filling out the SQ4R for it, answering the text questions and discussion questions in Common Lit, then go to Flipgrid and do your reflection or your response to the prompt. There's a YouTube video in there, I think it's like 4 minutes and something long, that I want you to watch first, and it's just reviewing what we've done, a practice. It's a different way. You don't have to go through the steps with it, but I want you to look at it and have a point to always go back to if you need to. Before I let you go and break you out into Common Lit, do you have any questions for me? All right, if you have no questions for me, go ahead and start it. And again, I will be here if you need anything.